All right. I think we're live both on YouTube and on Facebook. I could open up the chat. There we go. Oh, we've got 9 people here already. That was quick. Charles, gripping subject tonight. Yes, Charles, that is true. It is a gripping subject. Sorry. All right. So we're getting it going. Boy, we went from 9 to 7. So some people didn't obviously like that joke, Charles. So, and now we're back on 8. So we're going to get started right away. Welcome to No BS Woodworking Tuesday Tips. Tonight, I'm going to talk about, as Charles said, it is a gripping subject. We're going to talk about clamps, what kind of clamps I have in my shop, why I like the clamps I have, why I dislike some of the clamps I have, and how many clamps you really need. And some clamping techniques. Hopefully we can cover all of this in a reasonable amount of time. Two-wheel gators here. Awesome. Sam's here. Don't start that. Don't start what? Sam says. Douglas. Missed the joke. 2 Douglases are here. Hey there. All right. So like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about clamps, what they do, how they work, how many you need. That's always the key. When you start to put together a shop, it's, everybody looks at clamps and it's just like they're really expensive and how many should I have? And the answer is as many as you can get your hands on, because the more clamps you have, first of all, we're going to get it out of the way right away. And I'm going to tell you, I don't follow the old norm adage of every clamp you own plus one to clamp things up. I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we go through here. But the more clamps you have, the more things you can do. In other words, I like to glue up, when I make projects, I like to glue things up in smaller assemblies. And what that means is if I'm making a highboy, say, I can glue up sides or front and backs, and then start to assemble in assemble small parts of the project. Once that dries, I can then clean things up and then move on to the next. And it saves me work down the road of trying to muscle a big piece of furniture around just to do the final prep for finish. And all of that comes down to being able to, if you can only afford a couple of clamps, it just means your project's going to stretch out for more days, because you're going to clamp things, wait a while, unclamp those things, clamp up more sub-assemblies, and keep working your way through that way. Good. Leo's here. Doug. More Dougs. Tim's here. Awesome. Skip is here. Thank you. Awesome. I'm glad you guys are here. So I'm going to switch up cameras real quick, show you a couple of the different types of clamps I have in my shop. We'll just go over to that shot there. So this is just about every type of clamp that I have in my shop. Some are the workhorses, and I can tell you they are right here at the back of my pile here on the bench. I have these I-beam or bar clamps. They would sort of equate to what a lot of people have, which are pipe clamps. I like the I-beam clamps so much better because pipe clamps tend to flex and bow over time. particularly if you're really trying to put a squeeze on something there and you're putting a lot of pressure on there. I have a lot of F-style clamps. And these are really good, versatile clamps, although I'm not never been super happy with the brand clamp that I have. And that's the other thing. As we start to go through this, I've got a bunch of different brands here. Don't get hung up on a particular brand. You know, don't think, oh, well, that's what Chuck got, so that's what I have to have. Buy something that is in your price range. If you're unsure of how many to buy one or two, test them out and see how they work for you, and then go back and buy more. I've got what I call a parallel clamp. Some people call them hand screws. It's just a pretty traditional wooden jawed clamp. The ever popular C clamp. And then I have a couple of these quick grip kind of clamps. They ratchet with a little springing motion. And then I've got this kind of a quick clamp, which is more of a cam style clamp. And the idea is these two are probably the least used in my shop, particularly these really small ones. Something this size I'm using to, if I'm transferring a mark, if I'm making a piece of furniture and I want to hold a piece of wood in place so that I can transfer the marks from one piece to another, this is a pretty good choice because the clamp itself isn't going to be so heavy that it's going to misalign the piece that I'm trying to transfer those marks. These are good for quick, rapid fire things where you don't need a ton of clamping pressure. If I were to, if I ratchet that around on the cam, it has a very finite amount of pressure that it can apply to in any situation. Unlike the C clamps, the F clamps, and even the hand screws and the bar clamps, they're all based off of the amount of pressure you can put with the screw, as opposed to this thing, which is, like I said, it's just a single cam. So once you reach the maximum rotation on that handle, you can't apply any more pressure. So, Bob's here and Mark's here and Mr. Redlin is here. That's awesome. We're doing pretty good. We got a pretty good crowd. It jumped up there pretty quickly. So now you guys are looking at this, and I know somebody out there is thinking, okay, so where are his K-body clamps? Those ones that look like a bar clamp, kind of, but they're a mix between an F-style clamp and a bar clamp because they have these big heads that remain perpendicular to a bar, like you see on this F-style. And I've never really been a huge fan of those clamps. I don't feel that this kind of a handle gives you enough grip to put sufficient pressure on something. I'm going to switch back over to the other camera, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the other things. So you go out, you buy yourself, for me, the workhorse in the shop really is the I-beam clamp and my F-styles. These kinds of clamps have been around for decades and decades, the same as the wooden hand screws. And in fact, mine are, I'll switch back over to that other camera. You guys are going to see, I've had my F-style clamps for so long that if I can bring this in close enough, hopefully right here, you guys can see that it says these were made in West Germany. Okay. For those that are familiar with world history, you already know what this is. For those that are not familiar with world history, way back in the ancient days of this country and European history, Germany was divided in two. And when things fell apart in the Soviet Union, and if you don't know what the Soviet Union is, Google it. The wall that separated East and West Germany was free. They were making these lamps there at that time. It's been quite a while. So I don't want to go into a history lesson. I was just basically getting way off subject there. So I'm going to pull myself back. Clamps are great. Like I said, the workhorses in my shop are the F-styles and the I-beams, probably followed up by the hand screws and then the C-clamps. And with those quick action clamps being probably the least useful things in my shop. They're great for the lightweight kind of jobs. Like I said, if I'm trying to transfer a mark from one piece to another, to quickly clamp it, hold it in place so that I'm not flopping all over trying to hold something that's 3 or 4 feet long, mark the end, you know, that kind of stuff. So it's just rapid stuff. You may need other style clamps. You may, instead of big heavy I-beam clamps like this, I know that, you know, there's when I teach at Connecticut Valley, they have an awful lot of those aluminum tube style bar clamps, and they certainly make gluing up panels a whole lot easier because they just don't add all that much weight to the piece. You don't need, you know, 3 men and a small boy to lift the panel off the bench to get it out of there once you're starting to get it to dry. But there are a few other tools you need when you are clamping, and it doesn't matter whether you're clamping up flat panels or you are clamping up frames or cases. You know, one of the things that I've found that really comes in pretty handy are dedicated glue sticks, is what we call them. They're essentially bunks or some kind of a riser that these are leftovers from when we were doing 4-poster beds in the shop. You can see, I mean, they're substantially thick. Normally I make them roughly 2 to 3 inches thick by about 4 inches wide, depending on the material that I have. So, I mean, I've had some of my glue sticks for quite a long time, and they serve a lot of purposes here in the shop. You can see that, you know, they get covered in glue and dirt, and we put things on there to boost them up for staining and finishing and all that kind of stuff, as well as if you really look, we use them for backers for doing some freehand routing here and there. So the key is that you want things that are roughly the same dimension. You want the glue sticks to be nice and straight. The idea is now I can take material for a panel. So case side, whatever you want to call it. And I've got a good stable platform that raises it up off my workbench, because when I put glue on here, and I'm going to switch that camera and move it so that all of this is on camera, or at least some of this is on camera. Let's kind of come around there. I know you're watching me be off camera, not do anything. I swear it won't take long. So we're going to switch. There we go. All right. So now you can see I've got a panel laying on top of my glue sticks, my bunks, whatever. And I'm going to clear some of these out of here because I'm just going to knock them off, and it's just going to clatter everywhere and make a mess. So I'll toss these off to the side, and I'll hang on to a couple here. The idea is, as I'm working here and I start to put clamps on, I can go above my surface and very easily come in underneath and clamp from both sides of the board. Now, how these clamps work, and this is pretty much the same with all clamps. You've got that screw that tensions this piece up. So back here, I've got the handle with a screw. And as I drive that screw forward, this fixed head, or the adjustable head at the other end, locks in place, and I can apply the pressure. And the fact that the bar doesn't bend and I've got this big heavy screw back here allows me to put a massive amount of pressure onto this board. And one of the things you kind of have to sort of think about when you're clamping things up is that screw is right in the center of this head. And this is the same for pipe clamps. You know, you've got a head with a screw on there. It's just it's a different bar. So this screw is right in kind of in the center of that the head on there. And as I advance that, let's make sure I'm advancing and not retracting. But as I drive that head forward to apply more pressure here, that force is radiating out from the center of that screw, sort of in a 45-degree angle cone. So if I take my clamp and I bring it down until my bar is, I'm going to turn the clamp around so you guys can see. So on this panel, if you look at it now, the center of that screw is down below. It's actually kind of almost in line with the bottom edge of my panel. So if I start to apply pressure there, what's going to happen is it's going to want to bow that panel, loosen that up just a tiny bit, and turn it over so that it becomes convex on this side, because that force is down low and it's just twisting that head and putting pressure only on this top edge. So when I glue up, and tip alert, this is one of the first tips that we got here. I always make sure that I either roll the clamp over on an angle, because I want the center of that screw right in the center of my material. It's nice if you have a bar clamp like this that's nice and straight to lay it on here, because that's going to help keep the panel nice and flat across its whole width, right? So if I roll that over and I tighten this up, just snug it. Well, bring in the tail. There we go. I snug it up there. I'm going to take that center clamp off because I don't start in the middle. So I've got about a 3-foot panel here, maybe 3.5 feet. The first thing I'm going to do is kind of flush up my material and then give that a good snug. And I start at one end of my panel. And what I'm going to do is work my way from one end of the panel to the other, because right now what I've got is the ability and the leverage to take this end of the board and start to twist and raise and lower the boards on this side or this side of my glue up, independent of one another, until I can get that next area absolutely flush and then tighten up my next clamp. All of this sort of starts with being able to come to the table with a nicely jointed edge here. So whether I'm doing it by hand or as this one was done, this was done on a joiner. And you can see I have 2 marks here, an F and an A. It's upside down to you guys. I can always, if I was smart, I would have turned this around so you could see it from the beginning. There we go. So what they stand for is this face was up against the fence on my jointer, and this face was away from the fence on my jointer. And I marked them, I knew I wanted these two surfaces going together. So I tend to mark them this way. Some of the students who come here, I've noticed that they mark them with an I and an O. And the idea is they want to, one stands for in, so in against the fence, and the other one stands for out, away from the fence. And I do make spring joints. My joiner comes from Felder setup to make a very slight spring joint in there. That can be adjusted. That's a topic for another show. It's more joiner, more sophisticated joiner stuff than it is on clamps and clamping techniques and tips and stuff like that. So again, I'm going to start by making the ends of this board flush on the surface, tighten up that clamp, and then, like I said, if I now have leverage on my side over the length of my piece, I can lever that up and down until I get that middle just perfect, and then I can throw that clamp on there. Again, we're imagining that I have glue on here. Let's go a little wider on my shot here because you're not seeing. The only way to go wider at this point is to back up. All right, so because I am at maximum width on this camera. I just wanted to get in close enough that you guys could see the lettering and understand what I was doing and why, and then see how I have a whole lot more leverage to pull up on one side of that board and bring that in, okay? If I put this clamp on here, and I will, because this is going to come up nice and flat here. Again, I'm going to tilt this over so that the center of the screw is in the center of the thickness of my material. So this is nice and centered here, but if I put a little more pressure on there, and then I come down here, which brings me to another tool it's always nice to have, is some kind of a soft faced hammer. You can use a rubber mallet. I like these dead blow hammers because they don't tend to mar the surface too much unless you're swinging it like you're Babe Ruth trying to knock a ball out of the park. But I can make a few light taps and move that material around pretty easily, right? So if I'm having a lot of trouble, so if I've got two clamps on this board, now again, this is about 3.5 feet long. I'm probably only going to use 2, maybe 3 clamps, depending on how I do this, because like I started with, that pressure radiates out of the center of that screw at about a 45-degree angle cone. So that force is way around, above and below, and it's radiating out this way. And all I'm trying to do is make sure that my clamps, that force overlaps. So if I'm looking at these two clamps and they're radiating out at 45 degrees, they're crossing before they even get to that space dead between the two clamps. So what it's doing is it's allowing me, and again, the force is coming out of here in that same direction, 45 degrees out. So what's happening is I'm getting a fair amount of force even in this center area of the joint away from, between my two clamps. So it's not like, oh, I'm getting a tiny little bit of pressure here, a tiny little pressure there, so I need 27 clamps to make this thing work over a 40-inch piece. If I'm having trouble getting the surfaces lined up, I can take an F-style clamp or a hand screw, and I can slide my board down so that you can see what I'm doing. If I just take that F-style clamp and I very lightly place it right on my joint, I can now use it as a pry bar, I'm not sure if you can see that on there or not, but you know, I've got about 1/8 of an inch. This board is now 1/8 of an inch above that one right here. It's still relatively flush where my bar clamp is, but I can use it as a pry bar to get things sort of lined up. So if you're clamping up and you're getting significant pressure on these things and you find it really hard to move these boards, but because they're not perfectly lined up on the surfaces, you could also do the same thing with I'd have to hang it off the end of the bench, but I could use the hand screw in the same fashion, clamp it on there, then grab the handle and use it as a pry bar to rock that thing back and forth. Oh, John's here. Jeff's here. Awesome. Tim Brosnan, do you use cauls to protect the edge of the piece? Yeah, I have that's one of the other things that I was going to include in my list of things that you have to have that are ancillary tools to your clamps. So if I'm trying to see if, good, I've got that, you can just barely see the tripod for that second camera. That's one of the ancillary tools that I throw in here, kind of like the glue sticks, a soft faced mallet of some sort. The other thing that I'm going to throw in, sure, some clamping blocks or sacrificial things. Usually for my clamping blocks, I try and make them out of very soft wood. So I've got a lot of pine, poplar, those kinds of things, because if I'm gluing up a case, you know, dovetails, usually I don't do too much with clamping my dovetails, because if you cut them right, put some glue on there, put them together, all you have to do is pull the thing square, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. And you shouldn't really need clamps. Once in a while, they start to absorb so much of the glue that they won't seat all the way down. And at that point, I'll take some kind of a clamp, either a very long, heavy-duty F-style clamp or a bar clamp, and try and put pressure directly on each tail to push it down into the pin socket, those kinds of things. A couple of other ancillary tools that you need are a good straight edge of some sort. So when I clamp this up, so you can see I've gone above on the top of this board, I'm going underneath. If I grab my third clamp here, the plan would be to come down this end. And once again, I don't have to be right at the end of the board unless I have a problem. The idea here is I'm tilting it over, get that center of that screw in the center thickness of my material. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, the pressure is radiating out at roughly 45 degrees here and it's crossing. So I'm getting enough pressure on the joint in between my clamps that I don't have to worry about it. The reason I'm saying that is if I remove that center clamp altogether and we just pretend it's not on there at all, and this was how I clamped this board up, if you think of that pressure radiating out here at about 45 degrees, I've got a significant area here right in the middle of this board that there's no pressure on that joint whatsoever. You don't need a ton of pressure, but you do need a little in order to get that glue to really sort of bond between get down into those fibers and bond. So yes, I would put cauls or clamp blocks, something on the edges of this if this was my final dimension. Okay, as often as I can, I try and leave things over thickness and over width so that I can avoid, trying to hold on to two cauls and turn the clamp, as well as try and make it sure that it's tilted over at the proper angle. If I get a lot of glue squeeze out, not topic for another show, I'm not going to let that bar come in contact with the surface, because the metal here comes in contact with the glue and it leaves behind very nice black stain. So unless you like that look, I wouldn't do it. I tend not to. So again, looking at this, I've got an area in the middle, which is why on this particular piece, I'd probably go to 3. If it was a little shorter, if it was only a 2-foot panel, I'd probably get away with 2. And I could put one on the top and one on the bottom and probably be just fine. The reason that I'm alternating top and bottom is twofold. Number one, if I go to pick this panel up and both clamps are on the top and this panel has a fair amount of weight to it, if I grab it by the clamps and I don't have them centered properly and it's cupping that board on a concave side, so it's bowing it up away from the clamp. I pick this up, it goes shooting across the room. You know, small children and women everywhere are dying because of the shrapnel. No, I mean, you know, that kind of stuff. So that's one of the reasons. The other reason is having that other clamp on the underside helps counteract if this is bowing. When you put the pressure on there between the head and the tail on that clamp, the board is going to naturally want to bow away from the bar. If it bows into the bar, it's just going to stop, but it's going to want to push away because that's the direction, the only direction it can really go. So if I throw a clamp on the other side, it's counteracting the clamps that are this, you know, on top by having one on the bottom side. If it's a short panel and I'm gluing up with 2 clamps, that also counteracts it and helps keep things flat. That's the whole key here. If I'm going to glue up a panel like this, once I get everything pulled in and my joint's nice and tight, and I have this tiny little beads of glue squeeze out there, again, topic for a different day. The next thing I'm going to do is take that straight edge and I'm going to lay it across here in multiple places. If I had that 3rd clamp on there, I would probably do it on either side of each clamp and make sure that I'm not creating an artificial cup to this board. You might think that, oh, when I release the pressure, it'll go back perfectly flat, and it never seems to go all the way back. So a good straight edge, I can't say enough good about the nice red straight edge that I have, but it isn't, you know, anything, you know, I mean, it doesn't matter the brand. Again, buy what you can afford and what you feel comfortable with. So if I look at this right now, and I'll try and switch that camera and see if we can get you guys to see it too. I'll have to change my angle. And since I'm changing the angle, I'm going to walk over here and try and zoom in real quick on that straight edge. Sorry, low budget, no room for employees to sit here and run the camera for me. You get what you pay for. I don't know. Oh, good. Now that I did that, oh no, there's a little bit of I don't know if you guys are seeing the daylight right. You can see right there, my finger, the shadow of my finger underneath of that straight edge. At least I can see it on camera. I don't know if you can or not. So this thing's got a tiny little crown to it. It's high in the middle. So what that means is I'm not tight up against my bar right down here at this head. So I could readjust, change make sure I'm dead center on my piece, pull that in nice and tight. And now if I go like this, I still have a bow. So what that's going to tell me is I need to do something to flatten that out. So I could theoretically grab another glue stick and a couple of F clamps and put it on there and pull that thing nice and flat. Throwing a little bit of wax paper right over my glue joint so that I don't glue my panel to my glue stick. My glue sticks, this one happens to be poplar. The ones underneath here are maple. I don't necessarily tend to make my glue sticks out of soft material. The clamping cauls, clamping blocks, those I do. Again, let's go back here. So I can pull that flat. If it's severely cupped, at that point, I'm gonna, I'm gonna dry fit this before I put the glue on there, just to make sure that I didn't screw up my supplementary angles here. If I inadvertently ran the away face up against the fence on my joiner and the fence side up against on my joiner, I don't have supplementary angles. I have something that just is going to either make it convex or concave pretty quickly, depending on how accurately I got to 90 degrees with my fence. Usually it's pretty good, but even if you're half a degree off, it's going to give this thing some kind of a curve to it over the width, some kind of a cup. Again, I'm tilting my clamps, alternating surfaces to try and keep the pressure even across my board to counteract the cupping in one direction or another, those kinds of things. Check it with a straight edge. I do that with pretty much every glue up I do for gluing up panels. Case sides, tops, bottoms, tabletops, all of that stuff. I'm checking that because, like I said, if you glue it up and it's got a cup to it, you would think that just releasing the pressure would allow it to drop back down, but it never seems to return to perfectly flat. So take a little extra time. Make sure you've got everything lined up right. You have a plan of action. So plan your work your plan. That's always a good idea. It goes back to the layout stick idea. If you think things through, you have your glue sticks made, you have your clamps staged, your glue, everything's ready to go. You can test it, with a dry, make sure that it's not all that difficult to get the piece. If you're doing something 10 or 12 feet long, it would be nice to know, okay, here's where I have a problem in this glue up. So take the time to run through it once, pull the clamps off, spread your glue, get the thing going. It gets you, particularly if you have the glue sticks on here, and if you need, if you're doing a 10 or 12 foot glue up, you can just have a whole bunch of glue sticks. That's why I try and mill them all the same width, so that when I stand them up on edge here, I have a nice flat deck to work on, and I can go above and below with clamps wherever I need it in order to help this thing come together. Sometimes on something that long, your spring joint, the open, if you guys don't know what a spring joint is, topic for another show, it's touching at both ends, slightly open in the middle, and that allows me to pull it in. There's a real reason why we do spring joints. That is coming. Trust me, not in this episode, but further down the road. I talk about it a lot at some point here. So the idea is I can put the pressure on there. If I've got something really long, I may need to put a couple of clamps alternating from one another close together in order to pull that spring joint in as tight as it needs to in the middle. So let me make sure that I didn't forget anything in this endless rant I did here. I'm looking at my notes. I think I've pretty much got anything. If you guys have clamps, you're awfully quiet tonight. I mean, it's a gripping subject. So if I'm going to glue up a frame, and this is off a project that's going on here in the shop right now. A couple of mid-century modern beds are going on. If you guys haven't yet, I mentioned it in an interview that I did with the Modern Woodworkers Association. If you were on the email list, there was a link in the email that sends you right to the podcast that I recorded with these guys, and I mentioned these beds. They are going on in the shop right now. If you are going to glue up a frame, I'm going to work in much the same way. This is a mortise and tenon frame, all put together. I'm going to, just so you guys can see, real mortise and tenons, not, I'm going to switch my camera so that you can see what I'm talking about. There we go, right? Yeah. Not quite. I'm going to widen up just a little. There we go. So real mortise and tenon joinery, right? Get my frame glued up, start to assemble. So this is a funky frame. I have my stiles run through on this side, and I'm going to widen up some more and change the angle of the camera because you can't see very much from where we are. You get to see my computer in the background. So widen up just a tiny bit. There we go. Oh, I need to flip that or I won't be able to use the remote. There we go. Logistics. So this style on the frame runs all the way through. This rail runs out the end. This rail runs out the end with the style captured in between. So if I'm gluing this up, I have to do a pretty funky kind of a glue up. So I'm going to need a clamp this way to pull in this mortise and tenon joint over here. I'm going to bring it in. I'm on my glue sticks, the same as I would be if I'm gluing up a panel. I'm going to tilt that. Now, because this material is 1.25 inches thick, I don't need to tilt it as much to get the center of that screw into the center of my material thickness here, right? So I can put 2 clamps. I can put this one underneath. I can put it above. In this instance, I don't think it really makes a whole lot of difference. So I'm catching it on the end of the stile there, and I'm trying to make sure that my bar is relatively centered and parallel to the edges. If I start to get things off of center, I'm going to pull this out of square pretty rapidly. So one of the ways you can assemble a frame or a case and help the process along is to make sure that your clamps, and it doesn't matter whether you're using bar clamps like this, F-style clamps, K-body clamps, whatever you're using to clamp things up, you want to try and keep them relatively parallel to the case parts that you're clamping with them, because that's going to keep the frame kind of square. I'm going to pull my, oops, I can't pull them back that far because they'll fall off, but I can change the angle of my glue sticks here. Excellent. I love it when there are things that are getting caught up. All right, so if I go right under there, just use my shoulder. Again, tilt my clamp a tiny bit so that the center of the screw is right in the center of my material. Take my mallet, make my adjustments. Perfect. It's right where it's supposed to be. So I've got it all clamped up. I have the center of each of the clamps, the center of the screw is in the center of the thickness of my material. I want to try and figure out a way to lay my straight edge across there and make sure that I'm not rolling the stiles or the rails. I'd have to go to a shorter straight edge for that one. So we'll go to the 1-footer, lay it in here, get as much as I can. I can see that I'm touching all the way across there, and I'm pretty much touching there on my stile. So I don't want to be rolling the stile up or down, the 2 stiles up or down. This stile I don't want to be lifting or lowering. I want a nice flat plane in all directions. The last really easy tool that I need is some way to check this for square. Now I could grab my favorite square and throw it in here, and I can see that it is out of square, okay? When I put it over here, there's a gap at the bottom and it's touching up top. Let's get a bigger square. Try it with something bigger. Yeah. So if I turn this a little bit, you guys might be able to see that if I take this square, I can stick the blade in there and kind of rattle it around. It's touching in this corner. I can't get in there at all. Okay. So if I come in here, and that's 1/16 inch stainless. So my gap here is more than a 1/16 of an inch over 12 inches. The other way I can check it for square is with a simple stick. Now you can do this with a tape measure if you are so inclined. Take my pencil that I forgot to put on the bench, and I put a tick mark right at the corner there. I need to cut my board down a little bit, so we'll do so rather rapidly. About that. Take a couple of inches right off the end there. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. It just needs the stick that you're using. Could be anything. This is a scrap of cherry that just happens to be a uniform thickness. It's relatively straight. Not an absolute necessity here, but I can hook that right into the corner and transfer a mark right where my corner is. Flip my stick around, hook it the same, and I will try and get my camera moved there again and see if I can't get that in the frame nice and tight so that you guys can see it. Come in a little tighter. Let's see. Yeah, that'll work. So you saw I put that mark on going the opposite direction. So now if I hook this and bring it in here, you should be seeing that my tick mark is about 1/8 of an inch past the corner of my frame there. Okay, so my frame is right here, and my tick mark is about 1/8 of an inch farther. If that is the case, and I'm going to back up again on that camera. Wide, wide, wide. Come over this way. All right. So it's a little longer this direction than it is that direction. This was the shot you just looked at, where this is the tick mark is 1/8 of an inch past the actual corner of my frame. Here is where understanding what the clamps are doing and how they're doing it is going to come into play here. If I take my clamps and I adjust them so that I am squeezing more across the direction. So now you can see I'm nowhere near parallel to that frame part. And if I just give that a good squeeze, and I'm going to have to take a little more off of my stick, because now that I've gone that direction, I have more than shortened up the available space for my measuring stick here. Bingo. We'll deal with that later. And I went the wrong way. So, long direction. Real woodworking, not edited for your viewing pleasure. So I'm going to turn the clamp. I want to shift the clamp along so that it's squeezing along the long corners. So I've made this one out of parallel, and I've made this one out of parallel. And now if I take my stick and I bring it in there, I am now about 1/16 of an inch away from my line there, my tick line. And if I come this way, that tick line is hanging over this corner by about 1/16. So if I were to actually take and mark this and check it, you would see that it's perfect in both directions. And I didn't run a clamp from corner to corner. What I did was I changed the the pressure that my clamps are putting on so that they will pull the piece in the direction I want it to go. You saw what happened when I'm watching the screen, which is kind of flipped, and I'm thinking, okay, I got to go that way because that was the long side. So I tilted it that way. It also made for a better shot. So sorry I didn't plan out the out of squareness ahead of time. This way I can check across there, and if I can get the same dimension. Again, you can do this with a tape measure, a folding stick rule, a straight edge. If you have whatever you're comfortable using in your shop to measure those dimensions from corner to corner, right? So let me get that camera out of the way, and we'll switch to the wide shot. Try and wrap this stuff up here. Yeah. Trying to keep it from getting you guys seasick with the camera floating all over the place here. Probably isn't working so well. All right. So again, I'm clamping this up. If I'm having trouble with my clamps rolling my stiles over, I can always clamp a straight edge across there, pull things flat. I can change the pressure, change the position of that screw up or down on my piece. If I'm rolling these stiles, say this stile was rolling down. So if I lay my straight edge on there, it's nice and tight all across this rail. And then I've got an 1/8 of an inch gap out here at this outside edge. If I pull that center of that screw towards off of center of my board towards the top, it's going to naturally just pull this piece up. The same way that as shifting my clamps in the same direction as the long dimension on my, if I'm checking for square, I can actually rotate that stile up or down based on where the center of my screw is on that piece. Again, if you're using cauls, that's great. You can tape them into position if you're having trouble holding on to it, but you can see, if you leave things a little oversized, an 1/8 of an inch, 3/16, something like that you can go back and trim up afterwards, you're never going to have a problem. With the clamps marring the piece. Sometimes that's not an option. So then you need to use some cauls. And usually when that happens, you have 23.5 inches and 24-inch clamps, and all you have are 3/4 inch cauls to shove into the blank. So that means you need either longer clamps or smaller clamp blocks. Okay. Trying to think if there was anything else. I don't see anything else in my notes saying that, hey, make sure they do this or that. So for me, the whole idea here is, how many clamps do I need? The more clamps I have, the more assemblies I can glue up, the quicker I can get my projects done. But if I've only got room for, or can only afford a small group of clamps, I'm probably going to buy my bar clamps first, and then go to a handful of F-style clamps. And again, most people, I started out with pipe clamps because they're cheap and readily available. The great thing about a pipe clamp is, you can get 2 or 3 foot lengths of the pipe, and I tend to use the black iron, not the galvanized, because sometimes those ratchet pieces on the movable head tend to slip on the galvanized stuff, but your mileage may vary. But I always had black iron, and you could have them threaded on both ends, once for the clamp and then another for a coupling, so that you could put 2, 3, 4 clamps together. And if you need something that's 6, 8, 12 feet long, it's easily done. So that's the beauty of a bar clamp. You can buy short lengths. They're inexpensive by comparison. I mean, the price of bar clamps, depending on what company you're buying them from, it gets pretty pricey. I know I invested a fair amount of money when I first started in business to buy a lot of clamps, and my original thing was to go buy Wetzler's, and I really liked those well, I really wanted Wessler bar clamps and stuff. And the supplier that I was working with at the time, which was an industrial place, said, hey, we've got this new company that just came out, and you can get 20% more clamps for the same money. Which was fine, but I haven't been super happy with them. And the reason that I haven't been super happy, no matter how tight I make this F-style clamp, I can still take that thing and rotate the head, or the whole body of the clamp around. If I take my Wetzlers, and I'll grab one here, because I have one, and I clamp that down, put a fair amount of pressure on it, no matter what I do, I can't move that thing. That might not sound like a lot, but because this doesn't move, if I'm trying to glue one surface to another, let's get rid of the frame. So let's say I was going to try and glue my glue sticks together. And I can't do this. Yes, I can. So if I've got glue on there and this starts to slide, the more I move this, the more this loosens up. It's also going to allow these two surfaces to slip around as I'm clamping it. Whereas this Wetzler doesn't really move. I don't have very much pressure on there at all, and it's still rotating. Now I put a little more pressure on and it stops. That means once this is in place, it isn't sliding all over, okay? So that to me is a big thing. I like the body of these clamps better. These things never stick, and they slide back and forth very freely and easily. Half the time with this clamp, it locks into place, and I have to beat on the clamp to get it to cut loose. It's just a different style of adjusting mechanism. So they function. I've worked with them now since West Germany was a thing. So it's not like I hated them so much that I got rid of them. It's just there's a fair amount of annoyances. The clamps work. They just don't work as nicely and easily as I would have thought, given what appears to be a pretty good quality clamp. And I have a few newer F-style clamps from this company, and they're, they function the same way. I mean, 30 years or, 34 years of these clamps, and almost 40 when I think about it. And they're not, they haven't changed. They're still, they're a good quality clamp. They're just not at the same level as the old Wetzlers. Now, the big problem with these guys is they're no longer in business. These were made in America. They went out of business quite a long time ago. Probably, off the top of my head, it was more than 10, but I don't know if it was more than 20 or not. James wants to know, on the panel glue up, how are spring joints used, and do you create the spring joint on both panel edges or just one? So this, and again, I'm gonna cover this a lot in a future video. I can't necessarily say a live stream. The spring joint is created, you can either, so the joiner that I have from Hammer comes set up to make a spring joint automatically. It puts a slight concavity on each edge. And the difference over about a 3 or 4 foot piece, that gives you a couple of thousandths, 2-3 thousandths of an inch of gap between the two boards in the center. And the idea is, when I'm clamping these things together, my grain is running front to back here. So if I'm putting pressure here, and I have a slight gap in the middle, that means I'm compressing the fibers a little bit at both ends and pushing things together. The wood itself loses and gains more moisture out of the end grain than it does out of the face grain or the edge grain. So once this is clamped together, these boards are going to contract more across their width. So if I start by compressing those fibers, as the ends of this board shrink and expand faster than the middle of the board, the chances of my glue joint popping loose, popping open or cracking beside the glue joint, if I've done the glue joint properly, I should end up with a nice tight joint no matter what, but I'm not going to crack on either side of it as easily, because what I've done is I've built in a little extra wiggle room to keep it together. It also means that I can use fewer clamps, because all I have to do is pull that spring joint tight, and the two ends are fairly straight, are fairly tight to begin with. So if I'm gluing up a panel that's 1.5 feet or 2 feet long or 2 feet wide, I may only use one bar clamp right in the middle, and that pulls everything in. And again, I'm checking it to see how that pressure, even with my F style, even with my other F style, that'll actually fit on my example here. The pressure from the screw side of this is radiating out in that 45-degree angle cone, but it's also radiating out in a 45-degree angle cone from the center of the fixed head on this. So all I need to make sure of is that I'm covering pretty much the full length of my panel glue up in order to get that to happen. In order to get enough pressure on there. That spring joint really helps that, because as I close up that concavity in the center, like I said, it's adding a whole lot more pressure at both ends. If your joiner is not set up to do that, and again, the way you set up to make that happen is your outfeed table needs to your infeed and outfeed planer cannot be perfectly coplanar. The outfeed table, the trailing edge needs to drop very slightly, so that if you were to bring the infeed table up in plane at the cutter head, and you were to lay a straight edge across the length of your joiner, it would lay perfectly flat along your infeed table, hit your outfeed table, and keep on going, and you would see very slight daylight out at the far edge or the far end of the outfeed table. If your joiner is not set up that way, and you either don't know how or don't want to set that up, the easiest thing to do is take yourself a very nicely tuned, you could use a smooth plane, a jack plane, or a jointer plane. It's way easier with one of the shorter planes, depending on how long the material is that you're doing. And you can, if you set it down to about a 1/2 thou shaving, you should be able to take just a couple of shavings off of the center of each board and create the spring joint yourself. You don't want to have any transition point where you are starting the plane here and ending it there, and you don't want to be able to feel that transition point. You want it to be a smooth transition. Otherwise, when you put the clamps on there, you're going to have a gap right where the two pivot points are. So you can create them with hand tools. Again, topic for another day. Like I said, my joiner, the hammer joiner planers, the joiners, Felder stuff all comes through set up to automatically create a slight concavity to the surface. Does that make a difference when you're making a flat, if you're flattening a board? I've never found it to be a problem, but I don't really work, to 1/2 thou on, or 1 thou or 2 thou on my stuff anyway. I mean, it's just, that just expanded 2 thou. So, that's what I'm saying. It's just, you know, you got to sort of apply woodworking tolerances to woodworking events here. So uh, not that I wanted to dwell too much on the the spring joint, because again, that's coming. um, F styles to me are, like I said, are workhorses. I can glue up panels with them. It's not as convenient, and it's not, you don't get that straightening power that you do with a bar clamp to keep the panel flat. Make sure that you have a good straight edge of some sort around, so that you can check things. A non-marring, some kind of a rubber mallet or a dead blow hammer or something like that, so that you can make adjustments on the fly. If you can't use the lever, if you're going to lever things, make sure you have a couple of extra clamps that when I clamp it on there, I can use it like a pry bar, and remember to start at one end of your panel clamp and work your way across, unless you're only using one clamp and the spring joint, and then you're going to go in the middle anyway. All right, we've gone a good hour again. I'm not going to say it anymore, because I know that we're just going to do this every week. So if you guys don't have a whole lot more questions, and if you do, throw them down into the comments, and I'll certainly try and get to them here within, before the next episode of No BS Woodworking Tuesday Tips. If you aren't signed up, if you're watching me for the first time, I'm sorry. And you're not already on my email list, right down below here, you'll see not only my name, but my website address. Go there, sign up for the newsletter. Every week, I do send out a reminder that this show happens on Tuesday nights, or just join us here at 8 o'clock Eastern on Tuesday nights. If for some reason I can't broadcast live, that goes into the weekly e-blast too. So it would let you know, hopefully well in advance, not always, but well in advance. Next week, oh yeah, and if you like this, please hit the like button, subscribe, and make sure you have notifications on, because you really don't want to miss this. If you are interested, next week, I am going to do a whole bunch of stuff about the shaper. And I don't mean the shaper origin, I mean the spindle shaper. It's one of the tools that when I talk to students here that come to classes, or if I'm somewhere else teaching, the shaper seems to have this universal kind of a reputation for being the scariest tool in any wood shop. And I've seen people that very recently that were like, oh, we have to do something on a shaper. They're finger eaters and stuff like that. So we are going to jump in to the shaper a little bit, explain what it is, how it works, why I think it's actually a really great tool for even a woodworking avocational, an avocational woodworker's shop. If you can spare the floor space and the time, and if they don't really take up much more than a router table. Would I swap it for a router table? Maybe, but you'll have to come back next week to find out. So thanks for watching. Again, make sure you head to the website, sign up for the newsletter, like, subscribe, and kick the notifications on. And I'm just checking the chat every now and then here, seeing if there's anybody else that has a question. And the answer is no. So I'll see you guys next week. Thanks for coming.